Our special guest today is Don Milam, and he has a career unlike very few people who have served not only Jesus Christ, but served to help men and women. He, along with his wife, have experienced so many things, and God has taught Don profound lessons that'll change your life today. He was imprisoned, serving Christ in Africa. Recently, he's lost his wife of many years, who's in heaven. He tells us how to keep on going when it seems impossible. Let's welcome Don Milam. Don, thank you for being here today.
Hey, it's a joy, man. We're having a great day here. Enjoy being here at the university.
Well, to say that you have experience is really an understatement. I mean, you also have worked with so many people as an agent for books and media, and take us back to the beginning of how your career began.
Okay, well, it all really started when I got saved as a junior in high school, and my dad was a Southern Baptist preacher in Montana, and graduated from high school. I didn't know what to do. I had no clear vision for my life, and some people came through and talked about this Bible college in Canada. So I just went up to Prairie Bible Institute in Three Hills, Alberta, Canada, out in the middle of nowhere.
I've been there.
But a Bible college that has sent thousands of kids, around the world to minister for Christ. And it really has a real strong missions emphasis in it. And, a lot of the mission headquarters are in Canada or at Three Hills. And so like most young kids, Missionary come in and they'd come from China and talk about God doing this and God doing that. And it's like, oh yeah, that's my heart. That's where I want to go, And it happened to all of us, And then somebody came in from Borneo and talked about what God's doing there. Oh yeah, that's what I want to do. But in my third year of Bible college, a mission group called WEC, Worldwide Evangelization Crusade, founded by the great missionary C.T. Studd.
Wow.
They came and they had this program called the 19-point program, and they were 19 areas around the world that were unevangelized, and this was 1967 in my junior year. And one of those places was northern Mozambique. And I don't know, it just like, bam, it hit me.
Now help us with the geography. I mean, when you say northern Mozambique, most people know where that is, but I know Americans that don't even know where Kansas is, so help us exactly where that geography is.
Okay, most people would know where South Africa is.
Yep.
So South Africa's right at the very tip of Africa.
Right.
Right above that is Zimbabwe.
Right.
To this side on the Indian Ocean is Mozambique.
I got you.
So it's right on the Indian Ocean, right above South Africa.
And the population of Mozambique?
Probably 6 or 7 million people.
Okay.
And so, then after that, that was it. I knew that's where I was supposed to go. And it was at Bible college that I met my wife, Miki. And we were just talking about how strict this Bible college was. It was a miracle of God that I met my wife there, because you're not supposed to be in the classrooms, boys on one side, girls on the other. On Mondays, guys could walk north and south, and the girls had to walk east and west. No talking, no nothing. You're not supposed to see girls or guys on the summer,
Well, that's an impossibility, but go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, but the north, south, east, west, right there in the middle, that's where everybody met. So, but anyhow, I saw Miki, we fell in love somehow. I guess we were supposed to meant to be together, and got married. And at that time, it was very difficult to get in Mozambique. A couple of reasons. One, it was a Catholic country, and they didn't allow hardly any Protestant missionaries in. And the second reason, there was a civil war going on. People from Mozambique who were fighting for independence. And so, my wife and I decided we was going to go work with Teen Challenge, which ended up being a very strategic decision, which we didn't realize it at the time. So we worked with Teen Challenge in Philadelphia and worked with drug addicts there. I ended up working with which was also interesting, the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And we had a program set up where we'd go into the schools in the inner city And I'd talk about the dangers of drugs, and some of the kids who had gotten saved and delivered from drugs would give their stories. And so after 2 years of that, then finally there was this Nazarene pastor in Mozambique that said he would recommend and stand for me to come in. And so that was the little break for Miki and I to go. So,
How old were you?
27 years old.
Wow.
So, actually 26 years old. So Miki and I, with our 2 kids, flew to Lisbon and spent 10 months in Lisbon studying Portuguese. And then finally word came that the door had opened. We had a temporary visa. And I like to say that my wife and I were the last missionaries to go to Africa by ship. At that time, all the missionaries that I knew were flying to Africa, flying here and there. And it was a lot cheaper for Miki and I to take our 2 kids and go by ship. So,
And so how do you go by ship? I can only imagine.
no, and this was what they called a Portuguese cruise ship. I can guarantee you this was not a Portuguese cruise ship. It was nothing like anything I've seen, you know. But, you know, we were very poor, actually. And so our tickets were 3rd class. And somebody, you know, that was working with getting our tickets bumped us up to 1st class.
Wow.
Which meant that we had a room like 8 by 10 that had a little bathroom in it you had to squeeze in. We put the one kid on the floor, and then one of the kids slept was switched off with Miki and I. So 3 weeks on the ocean, finally landed in Mozambique, and pastored a church, actually started a Portuguese church, and it probably had 150, 200 people. And my Portuguese I did very well learning Portuguese, both my wife and I. And the thing that just kind of fast tracks this story was I led this kid to the Lord, had been involved in drugs. And his brother committed suicide. And João came to me and he says, my uncle is in distress, you know, because his brother jumped out of the 7th floor apartment building of his uncle. And so I said, yeah, let's go talk with him. So we went and talked with him, and he was weeping and crying, and so I told him, I feel really bad, you know, and I just wished I would have met him sooner. And if I had met him, this is what I would have told him. Jesus loves you, and he has the power to deliver you from the power of drugs, and he has a dream for you, a purpose for your life, and if you can discover that, you know, you'll find great joy in your life. And I would tell him about young men and women all across this country and all across this world that have come through out of the power of drugs because of finding Jesus Christ. And so a few days later, he gives me a call. He says, oh, I got this friend I want to introduce you to. And he says, I'll pick you up, you know, about 8 o'clock, that works. So he shows up in his Mercedes, very wealthy guy, takes us downtown. I says, well, who are we going to go see? And he says, well, he's the head of the Department of Health for the whole country.
Wow.
And I'm trying to stay, because I only have a temporary visa, and we're trying to be very low-key about what we're doing there in the country so we don't get kicked out. And so I'm sitting in his office thinking, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? And I felt like the Lord said, don't hold back anything. Just go for it. Tell him anything that I put into your mind and heart. So we walk in, he introduces me, and this guy says, this is an American, and he has an amazing story. I just want you to hear this story. So we sit down, and I just gave it to him. I said, you know, look, there's drugs all over this city and this country, and I can see it everywhere. I can see it on the streets, and there is no psychological answer to this. There's only a spiritual answer, and basically gave him the same story, you know, that it's only through the power of Christ, and these guys, through the power of Jesus, their lives can be changed, and they can be delivered from the power of drugs and find meaning and purpose in their life. And all they need is someone to tell them about this power. And I'm here, and I'd like to do that. And so when it was all over, he says, wow, this is amazing. Wow. He said, could you come back, in a couple of evenings? The president of Mozambique is elected a commission to study the problem on drugs. So the top educator, top people from the police department, the top psychiatrists, they're all going to be here. And I want you to tell them a story how you're going to save the young people of Mozambique. I'm going, okay.
And how old were you?
I'm 26 years old.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't know anything. I'm telling you, it's just like, I walk away. We're driving home. Like, okay, what's my plan to save the young people of Mozambique? It's like, I don't know. I didn't even know I was going to do this.
Right.
So the 2 days later, I bring Joanne, this kid who accepted the Lord, with me. And we go in the office, and there's this big round table, and I walk in, these people are all looking at me. I don't know any of them, but I know exactly who they are because the director of the Department of Health has told me. So we go in, and he's, this is so-and-so, and this is the psychiatrist, and this is a head of police department, this head of secret police. And when he said a secret police, I said, oh no, I don't want to know this guy really. So, and they says, okay, it's your turn, tell me your story. So I got Joanne, he told his story, how he had met God, and God had delivered him from the power of drugs, and how free he was, and how much he loved Jesus and wanted to serve him. And so basically got up and gave them the same story, I said, education's a wonderful thing, and psychology can help people think properly, but it is the power of God, because drugs gets such a hold on and a grip on these young people, and it takes the power of a miracle. And I believe that there is a God that loves these kids even more than you do, and that if they find Christ and they're introduced to the power of the gospel, their lives can change and they can be delivered. And that was my plan. So right after it's all done, so the director says, anybody have any questions? And the psychiatrist raises his hand. I says, okay, here's where he's going to ask me, where did you get your degree in psychology? And what college did you go? And what master's program did you attend? I'm thinking, oh, well, I went to Prairie Bible Institute in Three Hills, South Florida. So, but fortunately, he didn't ask that,
Yeah.
So he said, I've just gone all through Europe, studied the best rehab programs there, came back, told the president, there's nothing out there. These guys are a dismal failure. What this young man has presented sounds to me like the best hope for the country. I'm thinking, wow, I can't believe this is happening.
Wow.
So they made a decision there that they were going to give us permanent visas in the country. We could invite anybody we wanted from the outside to help us. They were going to rent an apartment building outside of town where we could bring these kids in and begin to work with them and train them and teach them in the ways of the Lord. And then this whole thing just fast-tracked for about a year and a half. The top drug addict in the country got saved. These kids are all coming to the center, and we're working with them, and we're teaching them, and then they're going into the streets and reaching out to their own friends and telling them the gospel of Jesus. And the Catholic priest, the local priest, came and says, wow, these kids are all changed. Can I bring my young people over to your meetings and stuff? So all these Catholic kids are coming and getting saved. And it was just like, now I'm 27, I'm thinking, wow, this being a missionary is pretty easy stuff, And it was just amazing. I mean, it was just amazing.
How'd your wife respond to that?
No, she was just excited as well, and by that time we had 3 kids. My son Jeff was born in Mozambique, and she would work at the center while I was out in the streets and teaching the kids how to cook, how to bake, and they had their favorite cake that they used to make all the time for each other, and it was a family thing. I mean, we were all in it. The kids all loved my kids, and it was just amazing. We had the first street meeting in the history of Mozambique, and brought in kids, some of the Jesus people. So this is 1974. So it's still the Jesus People movement.
So was the Jesus movement of America actually moving all the way to the continent of Africa?
Oh, all over, all over. There
Yeah.
were Jesus hippies everywhere.
And Billy Graham, I remember, was in Dallas, and
The big event in Dallas.
Yeah, sure.
Yep, I think Larry Norman was went
Uh-huh.
there, and he did the one-way sign for Jesus that went around the world, you know. And so we had a bunch of these bands came in, and we're out in the streets witnessing, and there was probably about 1,000 people in that park in downtown Mozambique, and evangelical church could not believe that this was happening. In the meantime, there was a war going on north. It had been going on for 7 years.
In what country?
In northern Mozambique. And many of the Mozambicans who had lived under the oppression of the Portuguese, because there was oppression, and the secret police would just drag these people if they in any way, you know, spoke out against the government. And because of that, most of these black young people were heading to Eastern Germany and to China and Russia, where they were getting indoctrinated in Marxism.
Really?
And then they were being supplied with weapons and stuff, and they had come back, and they were fighting a Vietnam-like war in the northern part of Mozambique. And Portugal at that time was fighting 3 wars in Mozambique and in Angola and in Guinea-Bissau in West Africa. And it was just killing them financially.
Yeah.
And until eventually there was a political coup in Portugal, and the first edict that came out of the new government was they were going to give freedom to Mozambique, to Angola, and to Guinea-Bissau. And so for us in Mozambique, that meant that Frelimo, that had been fighting a war in the north, was going to be given control of the country. So they went through a nine-month transition period, and the U.S. Embassy was asking everybody, all the Americans, to leave because there was going to be a time of instability. They didn't know what happened when the Frelimo leaders actually took over the country. And so a lot of missionaries were leaving, and I remember the night, Miki and I, with our whole staff and the kids that were there, we were praying, and I felt like the Lord said to me, you know, you've been teaching these kids about faith. You've been teaching these kids about trusting God. So what kind of message are you going to deliver to them if you walk out of this country and abandon them? And I just felt like I could not do it. I could not leave them. And I felt like God was going to protect us. You know, we were working with the government. We already were working with the transition government, talking with them. And I thought, you know, rather naively, you know, here I'm going to be, you know, doing a great work, and the communists will be here, and I'll be working with the communist government. 1 week after independence, in June 3rd of 1975, a policeman showed up at my house where I was home on lunch, knocked on the door, said, "Are you on, Don?" Says, "You need to come with me. I have some questions for you." And I thought, you know, trying to figure out, you know, because I work with the government. Took me in for 8 hours in interrogation. They asked me what was my affiliation with the former Portuguese government, what was my relationship with the director of health, what was my relationship with this person and that person. They asked me if I ever served in the military. They asked me what was my views on the Vietnam War, which was going on at that time. They asked me, you know, if I had ever had any affiliation with anybody for Frelimo, did I ever turn anybody in? And this like went on and on and on until finally it ended. They left me alone for about an hour, and then came back and took me outside, put me in a Jeep with three guys with AK-47s, and then took me to my home where they woke up my wife, searched our home. I told Miki, I says, I don't know what's going on, but they're taking me to prison tonight. But I think it'll get resolved, you know. They'll find out that I'm working with the Department of Health, and so don't worry about it. Let the ambassador know. And then they took me and put me back in the Jeep and took me to the local prison. And in that prison there were 3 cell blocks, and there was B and C and an A, and I was put into block number A, cell number 6. And it was probably like 11 o'clock at night. I was issued a blanket and a pillow, taken to that room, and there were 2 Portuguese farmers that had been arrested. I don't remember what they were arrested for. And then I just lay down on that cot, and I just said, God, what's going on? You know, what's happening? This can't be happening. Next day, the soldiers came and got me, took me to the mess hall, made me take off my shoes, roll up my pants, put me on the floor to start cleaning their floor and stuff. And they're throwing food at me while they're doing that. And then they picked me back up, and then I was taken back to prison a couple hours, to the police a couple hours later. And they had a few more questions and then taken back to prison. And that's the last time I ever talked with anybody from the police department, and ended up being in prison for 300 days.
What was that like to your faith? Did it shake you?
Well, here's kind of an insight into maybe how young kids think. So after 2 or 3 days in prison, I'm thinking, hey, I'm going to have a testimony. So I think, oh, okay, I was in prison, you know, and this will be kind of cool, you know, I'll be in prison for 10 days, you know, and I'll get released, and it'll be pretty awesome to have a testimony like that. After the first month, I'm telling God, I don't care about no testimony. I don't care about anything. Could you just get me out of here? And you go through ups and downs. And I'll be honest with you, there were moments, especially into the 6th and 7th month, where you're despairing. You've already seen some really bad stuff. You've seen things that you could not imagine could be done to another human being. You've been told that you're going to be taken to a re-education camp in the north. You don't know if you're ever going to see your family again. And you wonder, you know, it's like God supernaturally established that drug rehab center. I mean, it was a miracle of God that happened, and then just like that, have everything taken away from you. So I've dreamed my whole life, I'm going to be a missionary to Mozambique. This is what I wanted to do, and supernaturally this thing happens, and now I'm in prison, and everything's taken away from me. You're wrestling with having faith with God, but also, why is this happening, and how could this be happening, and how do I get through that, and what's going to go with my family, and you're seeing, you know, you're having your best friend, you know, being taken out and beaten and twisted and come in with rope burns all over him. One of their favorite things is, evidently they learned from the Chinese, they would put your arms behind your back, and they would tie the rope at the elbows, and they would tie it till the elbows touched. And then they would go a few inches higher and tie it again until it ripped their arms out of their shoulders. And we would watch that sort of thing many times. We would have guys who said something derogatory to the guys, and they would be brought in with big whips, and they would be beaten until they were bloody. I had another friend who was shot, and I was in my cell, and I heard the gun pop, and I ran out, and he's laying on the floor with a bullet had gone through here and blew out his sides, and you're just trying to help him and do what you can for him. Had friends, pastor friends, who were taken up to the north to re-education camps and never seen again. One day I was in my prison cell, and these guys were always high on pot. The soldiers were always high on pot. And they took me and 6 other guys, there were 7 of us, and took us outside, gave us shovels, and told to dig. And so we dug, and I can't remember, it was like 2 or 3 hours. It was sandy soil, so it was like a 5-foot hole is about what it was. And then they called us, and they stood us facing in front of that hole with our backs to them, with 3 or 4 guys with AK-47s high as a kite on pot, and you can hear them with the guns, and you're just standing there thinking, this is it. This is it. This is going to be the end of it. And a bullet's going to slam into my body, and it's going to be all over with. And And then they just started laughing and said, "That's a stupid hole, fill it back up, we changed our mind. We'll do this another day." So, you know, you go through all of this stuff, but the one thing that I learned, you know, in Bible college, you and I talked about this the other day, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. And knowledge makes you bigger than you really are. And what I did learn was, you know, I'd had all of this knowledge of God and could exegete, you know, find all the verses on grace, and I knew what grace was, and unmerited favor, but in that time, I literally felt the empowering presence of God. There was a grace that actually did make me bigger than I really was, and that's what I begin to understand, is that's the power of grace, because grace is only given when it's needed. And at that moment, I need a big barrel full of grace, and that grace would give me strength to stand up. And so we got permission to go to, there's a little Catholic chapel on the grounds of the prison, and got permission to preach there. And so I would preach, and we'd have kids coming in and people getting saved. There were Portuguese special forces, guys that were thrown into the same cell that I was at. Big old guys. I mean, these were really nasty dudes. And all three of them gave their life to the Lord. So we have opportunities to reach out and see a lot of people saved. And yet at the other times, they were just like, I'd be laying there in bed in the middle of the night just crying. I'm never going to see my family again. I don't know what's going to happen here.
Pretty tough boot camp for a young minister of the gospel to
Yeah.
go through that kind of incarceration. We're talking to Don Milam, who's the acquisition editor at Whitaker House Publishers, and who's had such an incredible ministry experience. He's reflecting on his ministry in Mozambique. Now, so you're there, the communists are in control. How in the world did you get out?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I was never allowed to see anybody from the American embassy or any representative of the American government for 299 days. They did not allow them to come and see me. And after 6 months, because it got so bad on the outside, and because the government was beginning to say that any child born in Mozambique was a child of the government. Well, I had a son who was Mozambicano, as we said. And so my wife and I made the decision that she should go home, take the kids home, get them back in school, and hopefully, you know, we were hoping that I was.
And where was home? Was it back in the U.S.?
In Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Reading, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
Pottstown, Pennsylvania at the time.
So you were left in prison?
So I was left, you know, and my family's gone. No American other than a few Americans that they'd finally got some diplomatic relationships with the Mozambique government. So
was anybody from the State Department aware of your incarceration?
yes, yeah. In fact, there were several organizations that knew about us. There was an organization called Prisoners for Christ who were trying to get the word out to the government. And in fact, Henry Kissinger made a visit to East Africa about 3 months before I was released and talked with one of the officials from the Mozambique government, trying to see if they could get a release for us. And they told them that if you put any more pressure on us, we're sending these guys straight to a re-education camp in the north, and you'll never see them again. So this was like day number 297, 298. And I was reading my Bible, and it was, and I forget the chapter there in the Psalms, but it was like, you know, David's going into one of his rants, you know, where are you at, God? Why have you forsaken me? The enemy's been exalted up over me. And so that's kind of the first part of that chapter. But in the last part, the translation that I had, which I don't even know what it was some Bible that I'd found there. But it says, but my heart shall rejoice because you have set me free. And there was just something in me that said, it's coming. I don't know how it's coming, but it's coming. So on day number 299, I'm called to the front of the prison. I thought, they want to talk to me about something. What have I done now? And I walk into the room, and it's two guys. I know they're Americans just by their clothes. You know, you can tell Americans overseas by their clothes. And it was two people from the American Embassy. And they said that they had just got word that I was being released. Let me back up, because before they came, earlier that day, somebody from the police department showed up, said that a determination had been set down from the government that I was going to be expelled from the country. However, they weren't going to pay for it, and however, I would not be able to leave the prison, that I had to take care of getting the money for me. So then that's where I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen, what I'm going to do. And then I was called up, and these two Americans were there. Well, what had happened was there was a Christian young man working at the police department, and he saw the orders go by, and he knew of reputation who I was. And over lunchtime, he went over to the American Embassy and said, I just saw this guy's supposed to be released. You need to go over there and see if you can get in the prison to see him. So they said they would do everything possible. They'll get me a ticket, they'll pay for it, they'll get me out of there. But they said, everybody's fleeing the country. It could take up to a month before we can even get you a ticket to get out of here, but just relax, go nowhere. And I says, I've been relaxing for 299 days. I ain't going anywhere, you know. So then, then the next morning they showed up and they said, we were at the travel agency, and there's this pandemonium, and people are trying to get tickets and stuff. And somebody just because there was another American with me, somebody put 2 tickets on the table there and said that they didn't need them. And I just grabbed them. By the way, you will be flying out this afternoon.
Wow.
So, that afternoon they put us in a Jeep with the same, not the same soldiers, but with guys with AK-47s that drove us to the airport. And was able to talk with the American ambassador, and the American ambassador, which he was by then, they gave us each $100 and put us on the plane, and then we landed in Johannesburg. As soon as we got off, there was all this cheering and stuff, and didn't realize people around the world had been praying for us. And then landed at JFK. My wife was there.
What was that like, reuniting with her after
it was
that kind of separation?
Insane. It was surreal, to be truthful. Think 24 hours before that, I'm living in a Mozambique cell, and not even knowing if I'll ever live again. And then all of a sudden, there I am with my wife and stuff. It was exciting, exhilarating. We were so happy, but I'd also left a lot of friends there, and a very close friend of mine who was a Zimbabwean and had worked with us. So that part was very sad, and fortunately 4 months later he was actually released from prison. And so the end of the journey, and I felt on the plane coming home that grace lifted, because it was no longer needed.
So it is in fulfillment to what Paul said, that there's a unique grace of God for these trying moments, and you experience that.
And what I've understood is, you don't blame God on these things. Life happens.
Right.
So God had supernaturally, worked in my life to help us start this drug rehab center. But also He's supernaturally empowered me to be in that prison cell, and also influence and reach a lot of people for the Lord. So you walk through life trusting God.
Now you work as the acquisition editor for Whitaker House, and they've published for so many years so many outstanding Christian books, and have had a tremendous outreach. And they're publishing Jeremiah Johnston's upcoming book, Unanswered. So we're really delighted to work with you and with Whitaker House, and we look forward to the future. Tell us what that's been like. I mean, you've seen it all and heard it all, and
well, it's exciting. I've been in publishing for 21 years. I'm coming out of having lost my wife to cancer, back in October. And
Married how long, Don?
46 years. So, but in this last month, you know, when Jeremiah and I first talked on the phone, it was amazing. Just such enthusiasm and joy. And the more that I heard his story, the more excited that I became. And so finally, you know, the conversation developed to the point where, you know, we had then presented to our acquisitions team and talked with Bob and Christine. And Bob's, of course, the publisher, and Christine and I work together pretty closely. I like to say I get to do the easy job of finding the authors, and then I turn them over to Christine, and she does all the hard work.
All the tough work.
Trying to lead these guys through all the work. But it's, I love Whitaker House. I love what we're doing. I love Jeremiah. I love his book, Unanswered. And I believe it's really important, because a lot of people like I in that prison cell had some unanswered questions. Life throws stuff at you.
So Jeremiah's book, Unanswered, in a sense, was almost like a personal message to you.
Yeah.
There's a riveting chapter in his book, When God is Silent.
Yeah. And I think, I can't remember, but I think in one of my conversations with Jeremiah, I mentioned that particular chapter.
Really?
Because I've gone through some dark nights in my life, you know, and it felt like God is silent, you know. I think it's one of the Jewish philosophers that talks about the eclipse of God. And there are moments like that when you feel like there are no answers.
Well,
And it's a great chapter for me personally. It was one of my favorite chapters.
we're talking to Don Milam, who's the acquisition editor at Whitaker House, publishing Unanswered by Jeremiah Johnston, PhD, professor at Houston Baptist University, and the founder of the Christian Thinker Society. You know, Christian Thinker Society has the mandate teaching Christians how to think and thinkers how to be Christians. You don't have to divorce your intellect with the Christian faith. In fact, you know, I really candidly don't know how people suffer without the capacity of grace that's afforded by God. Do you?
No, I mean, it's impossible. And that's why they call it faith. Because you get into situations where, you know, you don't understand what's going on. You're trying to figure it out, but it's a faith. God calls you to something that you cannot see, and you wonder how you will get there. But that's, you know, you trust God. You take steps. You move forward, and it happens. You know, with a publishing company like Whitaker, a man had a dream. For this university, somebody had a dream. Somebody believed God. Somebody trusted God and took some steps forward. And this is a result of the fulfillment of a man's dream who trusted God and walked by faith.
I want to remind those that are watching that Unanswered is a missional book. And there are many books that we can buy that we read and they bless us and they encourage us. But in this book are addressed vital topics. And I mean, not only the reality of where is God when it seems he's silent, when horrific problems hit us. Jeremiah Johnston talks about suicide, mental health issues, proof of the resurrection. It's the kind of book, really, and not every book fits this genre, where you get a book, but you get 2 or 3 others to hand to a friend, a family member, somebody who has experienced or is experiencing one of the topic matters of the book. Do you see the mission of Unanswered like I do?
Yeah, and what I was thinking of, how old is Jeremiah again?
34.
Okay. So I came out of prison when I was 30 years old.
Wow.
So there's a sense in which, here's a guy. It took me a long time to figure out the answer to those questions. And here's a guy, you know, at 34 years of age that's had a download, you know, from the Holy Spirit, plus things that have come out of his own life and experience in talking with people and wrestling with those questions that are very difficult to answer. And too often Christians try to answer those questions without thinking. Well, just
Right.
trust God or just believe God.
Yes.
And they go for the short answers rather than trying to find right answers that are going to be able to help. And I think that's the value of what's happened with Jeremiah's book. He's wrestled with him, you can tell. He's talked with a lot of people, and so the answers that are in there, they make sense to me. And I'm 69 years old, and I've been wrestling with a lot of these all my life, so.
Os Guinness has said this is the age of apologetics, because the questions are so paramount, the problems are so over the top, society is so disheveled, and the family unit, marriage, I mean, we just see epidemic after epidemic as it characterizes modern society. This fast hyper technology has left people so void and hollow. And as I look at his book, I say, here is a tool that can be used. I want to close with this, and I want to be sensitive to you. So if I'm out of bounds, tell me. You watched your wife suffer, and you had 2 very difficult months that, being married 36 years as I have, I don't know how I could have done it. How did you get through it? And then what is God saying to you now at this juncture, having someone so close who was on such a remarkable journey of faith with you that you have to temporarily say goodbye to and anticipate a reunion in the future?
Well, you never expect to be in those moments, and when Miki first got cancer, we thought, well, we'll trust God, we'll get through it, we'll believe God that He'll heal her. And some people do get healed. I know people that have been healed from cancer, and you rejoice in that. But I also know that there's others that have not been healed and no longer among us. My wife had tremendous faith, trusted God, believed God, but everything that the enemy threw at her, everything that cancer threw at her as it moved from one part of the body to the other, she held firm. And it was amazing grace. Grace in a prison, but the grace that Miki demonstrated in that time was amazing. Every doctor she talked to, they were just amazed at the fact that she was more concerned about others than she was about herself. And she would always want to tell people how much she loved Jesus. It wasn't like, do you know Jesus? You need to get saved. She would just say, man, I just love the Lord. He's so good to me, and He's helping me get through this. And people are like, wow, I've never seen anything like that. And so when it became more and more difficult, it was, you just hang in there. But I probably was in some self-denial. I thought, she's beat everything. She'll beat this. Until that day that, standing over her bed, she breathed her last breath. And you can't believe it's over with. You can't believe it's gone. You don't want to live. You want to die. You don't want to be without your wife. And then there's, for the next 3 or 4 months, it was incredibly difficult. But the grace was there. But grace doesn't move you in 24 hours to deep depression to super happy, jovial guy.
Right.
It doesn't do that. There is the natural process, as there is in all things in life. Healing sometimes comes quickly, sometimes it's a process, and for me it was a process. And I know that she's there, she's up there. I know that she would not want me to be sitting around for a year, 2 years, moping and whining about my life. She would expect me to move on. And she's
Take your time, Don.
She has a special place in my heart, and it'll always be there, but I know she would want me to get up, shake off the dust, grab hold of the grace of God that we both love dearly, and hang on to Jesus and finish the race and finish what He's called me to do. And so that's what I'm committed to doing.
And it really encouraged me, Don, when you said the very process of being involved in unanswered was invigorating to you.
Yeah.
And so I want you to know, as the launch director and pastor of Christian Thinkers Society, how excited we are to partner with the Whitaker House. And I want to just tell every single person, rarely does a book come along that could relate to everybody who lives in your subdivision. Every person that goes to church with you, every person that's on the floor of the business that you're working on. The answers that author Jeremiah Johnston gives in this book are those searching questions. And so I want to encourage you not just to get a copy, I want to encourage you to get about 5 or 6 copies and use them and reach out to the men and women that you know. People are asking questions, they're leaving. When we just returned from the atheist convention in Memphis, we discovered 70% of the atheists there attending were deconversions. So they all had the common denominator. They came to some crucible in their life. They had some searing question about God and faith, and they didn't have adequate answers. So they wrote off their faith and they walked away from God. Just as Chuck Templeton did, who started with Billy Graham. And Chuck, before he died, tears in his eyes. I remember when Billy came to Toronto, just before he died, he said, I just have such a life of regret. You can prevent that Christian casualty by getting unanswered. We're going to show you how. Stay with us. Thank you, Don, so very much.
When it comes to faith, sometimes it can be tough to get answers to our questions. How do we know God is real? Where did the Bible come from? What happens when we die? I'm Jeremiah Johnston, and I founded an organization called the Christian Thinkers Society to help people deal with questions just like these. Far too often, these are questions that people are afraid to ask. They don't come up in polite conversations. Perhaps they're too embarrassed or fear that there might not actually be an answer. And so we end up with these deeply personal questions that go unanswered. In this 6-week small group Bible study, we're going to take your unanswered questions and answer them one by one. I hope you'll join me as we discover answers to life's unanswered questions.